I'll be reading from Luke 19, 1 through 10. And he entered and was passing through Jericho. And behold, a man called by name Zacchaeus, and he was a chief publican, and he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the crowd, because he was of little stature. And he ran on before and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. And he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying, He is gone into lodge with a man that is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have wrongfully exacted aught of any man, I restore fourfold. And Jesus said unto him, Today is salvation come to this house, forasmuch as he is also a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost.
Good morning. Oh, this thing works. It's cool. I have to get used to this. I'm not used to having an earpiece, but I figured it would work better for my voice. It's so good to be here this morning. My wife and I have been very grateful for my parents who came down to help us unpack the boxes. We're very happy for all of those who helped us unload the U-Haul. That was a great help. And it's good to be here this morning. And as you can see, we'll be talking about Zacchaeus, although I think I heard someone say it's about me, but I don't think I'm quite that short. I don't know. Maybe I am. But it's good to be here. It's been a busy few weeks for my wife and I. Up until we moved, we had a door knocking and gospel meeting campaign. And so we had two congregations come down from the upper parts of South Carolina and one in Augusta, Georgia. And we knocked about 2,000 doors in just a few days. They brought down about 25 people, and between them and a few of our youth group and stuff, we knocked about 2,000 doors. We had a good response, but we did that up until Wednesday, and then Thursday morning, the group left, and we packed up Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and yeah, that's what it was. And then we ended up leaving. So it was pretty much a pretty quick turnaround, and so it was very busy, but it's been very good to be here. And let's go ahead and get started. Zacchaeus, we'll go ahead and reread some of these. It looks like my screen behind me is not working, so I'll use my iPad. We'll go ahead and look at Luke. Let's go ahead and reread these first 4 verses real quick. He entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. So we see pretty much right away that Zacchaeus did all he could to see Jesus. You know, Zacchaeus, being a very short man, he climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him. Because obviously, I know what that's like. I know what it's like not to see people. It's a very frustrating thing. I can remember back maybe 10 years ago, 2 inches, when I was at parades and stuff. I couldn't see very well. So I'd either try to climb on vehicles, maybe climb on trees, maybe climb up on Dad and say, hey, I can't see. But it was, so he did all he could, but notice something, and there should be another point there, but he desired to see Jesus due to his stature, and he went out of his way. There should be 2 subpoints, but that's all right. We'll keep going. Let's go to look at Luke 19. Let's keep reading and notice something very interesting. I lost some slides in here. It's all right. See, he went out of his way to see Jesus. He actually said he went up on ahead. Let's go back and look at these slides. I went through this yesterday and checked all these slides. He said, so he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him. So see here, he went out of his way. He planned and said, okay, Jesus is passing up on ahead, so I'm going to run up ahead and see him. He didn't just wait for Jesus to come to him. He made a plan and said, well, he's going to be there in a little bit, so let me run up on ahead and meet him there because I need to see him. I really want to see him. Let's keep reading and look at these next few verses. And 5 through 8, looked on too many times. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. That was pretty amazing. We see here that it is not advancing my slides. That's all right. Zacchaeus answered the call of Jesus. The first call is the call to meet with Jesus. There was obviously some point when Jesus had called him, and he found out that call and went to go meet with Jesus. We see that he went out of his way to see Jesus. And then the call to make a change. Obviously there was that call to make a change, because here we see that, he said, I give on behalf of my goods, I give to the poor. And he's repenting to Jesus. He's making that change, saying, I need to make that change. Not only that call, but then the call to dedicate his life to Jesus. And that's real important. He then at the end said, Lord, I give half my goods to the poor, and after defrauded anyone of anything, I'll restore it fourfold. And then Jesus then said, salvation has come upon this house. So obviously there was that call and dedicate to his life to make that change. But let's go on ahead. I don't think my PowerPoint's working today, so you'll have to apologize with me. But the next point is that Zacchaeus did all he could to change his life. This is one of the most important points of the lesson. He did all he could to change his life. He didn't wait till he was perfect. He didn't wait until he had nothing to change. Zacchaeus said, I know I have work to do, so I'm going to make that change, dedicate my life to Jesus, which is an applied point. But then he did all he could to change his life. He stepped beyond mere agreement. And that is so important. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but he stepped beyond mere agreement and put it into definite action. Being a disciple isn't necessarily just doing whatever and just saying, I agree with you. Being a disciple is putting and stepping on beyond mere agreement and putting it into practice. But then he completely changed his lifestyle. You see here, Zacchaeus, he had the easiest life available. He was a tax collector. He had lots of money. He was able to just kind of thumb through, those little weights on the scales and take lots of money. He had a very comfortable lifestyle. And he changed that to completely live for Jesus. And then that meant giving look at this. We got it working now. Sweet. All right, so it's now a little bit more comfortable now. We can get more easy now. So he completely changed that lifestyle and realized, hey, I have work to do. And he realized, he said, I'm going to give back all the stuff I've stolen. And that was probably a lot of money. And now he's not going to quite make as much money, so it's going to, be a lot harder to live for him, because imagine downsizing to the nth degree. And that's kind of what Zacchaeus was doing. But what does this mean to all of us? We've kind of flown through Zacchaeus' story. He answered the call, 3 calls. The first call was the call to meet with Jesus. Well, that's an applied call. Jesus was out teaching, and he wanted to meet with Jesus. He wanted to talk with Jesus. Then the call to make a change. He needed to make a change, because obviously when he met with Jesus, there was obviously some discussion that they had where Zacchaeus then replied, well, I need to change my lifestyle. There had to have been some conversation for them to make that change. Otherwise, Zacchaeus' statement is out of place. It's just a random statement. So obviously they had some discussion and said, hey, we need to make that change. I'm not doing that. And then number 3 is the call to dedicate his life to Jesus. So we're reviewing these points. These are important points, but we'll apply them to our lives as well. Let's keep going, and we're going to fly through this real quick. Now, how does this mean to us? Well, we need to do all we can to see Jesus. That is so important. Just like Zacchaeus, we need to do everything we can. We can't wait, sit back, and say, well, maybe it'll find me. Maybe faith will find me. Well, no, we have to find our own faith. We have to put our faith in Christ. We have to do all we can to see Him. And sometimes that means we have to get rid of a few things, just like Zacchaeus did. Maybe we need to get rid of some friends. Sometimes friends get in the way. Just like Zacchaeus' height was an obstacle to see Jesus, maybe our friends are being obstacles to see Jesus for ourselves. We all have friends. Hopefully we all have friends. But I can remember growing up, I had lots of friends that weren't exactly the best influence for me. Even in college, even at Freed-Hardeman, even at a Christian university, there were friends that weren't the best influence, that got in my way of being a Christian, being a follower of Christ. Now maybe technology gets in the way. This is a big one. You can see there's a laptop, a tablet, a phone. Everything is just one click away. Whether it's, things we shouldn't be watching, whether it's, Facebook could become an issue with, lots of gossiping. Whatever it may be, maybe we need to cut ties from these things to be able to serve Christ better. And maybe they're becoming an obstacle on the way. We've become so dependent on technology, and myself included, but almost to the point of sometimes we spend too much time on technology when we could be spending time reading God's Word, praying, meditating, spending time with Christ. But maybe also, movies. What are we watching? What types of movies are we filling our minds with? We just ended up with that gospel meeting I told you about back in Georgetown, and he talked a little bit about this and saying how it was so so much filth was on that we're filling our minds with all of this, and then we wonder, why are we so upset? Why are we so negative? He says, in order to be positive, cut out all that filth from your mind. Don't watch that stuff, and then be able to be happier, have more joy in your lives. It's all about attitude. It's all about decision making. But then, the big one that Zacchaeus also struggled with, money. We all like to have money because what? We say, well, money can buy happiness. Well, no, money can't buy happiness. Money buys stuff, and stuff actually doesn't make you happy in the long run. We have to learn to be content with what we have instead of trying to hoard everything and stop serving Christ. And then hopefully this next one may show up with the background, family. Now this one we have to be very careful about. Sometimes our family can get in the way of serving Christ. And I'm not saying that as a generic statement, but sometimes, our family members, whether it's immediate or extended family, when we should be maybe teaching them the gospel, but we don't because we're afraid. Maybe we should be doing it, going to church, but we don't because we don't want to upset somebody. If we're putting our family before God, then that becomes a problem. If we're putting family before serving Christ, that becomes a problem. People say, well, I'll put my family first. Well, no, we should put God first and then family. That's the order it should go in. And we need to remember that and make sure we're doing all we can to see Jesus. Whatever obstacles are in our way, we need to get rid of them. Let's go to Philippians 4, verse 13. I'm sure we all know this, but at the same time, you may be thinking like I was thinking when preparing this lesson, that, wow, that's a lot of stuff to cut out of my life. Because those things are easy. Those things are enjoyable. Looking at things or watching movies, spending time on technology. That's all fun stuff. It's easy to do that, but sometimes it's hard to make the necessary changes. And Zacchaeus knew that. But as Paul writes in Philippians 4, verse 13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. We may be saying, well, this is a lot of stuff to do. This is really hard. But we have to realize we can do anything if we put him first. If we put him as the driver in our lives, we can do whatever because he is the one who gives us strength. Let's go on and look at some of those calls we talked about earlier. We also need to answer the call. The first one is, hopefully that's big enough, we need to answer the call to go to Jesus. Too many people say, well, I want to experience it. I want him to come to me. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to relax and maybe I'll experience Jesus. Well, that's not what Christianity is all about. We have to go to Jesus. He's waiting with open arms, but we have to go to him. Go to him and dedicate our lives. We have to go to him, put him on in baptism. All those things that we have been taught, we have to go to Jesus. Christianity and having faith is an action verb. It's not something we can do passively. Let's go to Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 and 29, I think. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. So you see here, Jesus is saying, come to me. He's not saying, hey, just sit back and I'll come to you. No, he's saying, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden. So a few things that are implied here. Well, we have to actually be doing the action. We have to be going to him. But also it says we have to be laboring, and we have to, it says, and it implies about working hard and being tired. So we have, being part of, an act of Christian is laboring in the faith, going to Jesus, and then we'll find rest. It's such a blessing to be able to think about that. But let's go on. What's the second call? The second call was that we need to answer the call to commit to change. If we have nothing to change, we have no reason for Jesus. If there is nothing for us to change in our lives, then Jesus came down on this earth and gave his life for nothing. And I don't believe that God would do that. We all have things to change in our lives. If we're not a Christian yet, we have to commit to dedicate our lives to Christ, put him on in baptism. If we've already done that, we already became a Christian, we constantly have stuff to change. We constantly have things to improve on, to work on our struggles, on our sins in our lives. We have to constantly work to become more Christ-like. If we're not becoming like Christ, then we're not being a Christian. Being a Christian is saying, hey, I imitate Christ. When you look at me, you should see Christ. That's what being a Christian, that's what proclaiming to be that Christian is all about. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 4, looking at verses 22 and 24. Ephesians 4, 22 through 24. It says, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life, and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Right there, it tells us we have to commit to change. We have to put off the old self, and that's continually putting off the old self, because the old self is the easy way of life. It's easy to fall back in that old self, but it says to put on that new self. When you become a Christian, or if you are a Christian, you have to keep on remembering that you are now not living for yourself, but living for God, and making sure that you're created after the likeness of God, which means we have to put on all those characteristics that display Christ, that display our Creator. When others look at us, they shouldn't say, hey, that's so-and-so. They should look at us and say, they exemplify Christ. That's what being a Christian is all about. But then we also need to answer the third call. The third call is to dedicate our lives to him. This one I like to call the umbrella call, because it kind of goes with going to Jesus and committing to change, but it also kind of is a standalone point. We have to dedicate our lives to him. Putting him on baptism, becoming saved, that's us saying, I'm not living for myself anymore. I'm going to start living for Christ. I'm going to start living for God. Now, my life is now in service to him. It's not pleasing myself any longer. But it also means we have to dedicate our lives each and every day, not just 1 or 2 days of the week. Luke tells us, records Jesus saying to take up your cross and follow me. And that's how we quote it, take up your cross and follow me. But I left out a word. Luke records, take up your cross daily and follow me. It's a daily effort. We have to, every single day, serve him. But let's go to Ephesians chapter 4. I really like Paul's letters. Let's go to Ephesians 4. Let's look at these first 3 verses. It says, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And then he also writes again in Colossians 1, verses 9 and 10, and so from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to, there it is again, walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. May you be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for all endurance and patience with joy. And then again, he writes to the Thessalonians in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11 and 12. For you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and then charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. Well, that's a lot of walking in a manner worthy of the Lord. And that's what it means to dedicate your lives to him. To put off this old self, to put on the new self, and then to walk in a manner in which you have been called, worthy of the Lord. All these things mean we're not walking for ourselves anymore. Our whole life, we should be taking up the cross and living for Christ. Living for him and no longer ourselves. And Zacchaeus knew that. Zacchaeus answered each one of those calls. He answered the call to go to Jesus. He answered the call to commit to that change, to no longer live that old lifestyle that was so comfortable, that was so easy. It was easy for him to do that. And it was not easy to make that change, but then to dedicate our lives to him. To then say, I want to live like this forever. It's not just a one-time thing and then I don't have to worry about it anymore. It's not just a one-time thing and then we can just do whatever we want. Well, no, it's a daily effort. We have to take up our cross every single day. But also, we have to do all we can to make that positive change in our lives. We have to do all we can, and that's going to be hard. It's a pretty big deal, a real big deal to do this. We can't just make that change and then say, I don't have to worry about it anymore. We have to then put what we agree with, what we read in the Bible, into action. We have to put what we've been commanded to do and do it every single day, making that positive change in our lives. Zacchaeus did it. I think we can do it. Everybody, we read these stories and we read all these men in the Bible like there were some made-up people, like there was some story that just someone wrote down. But we forget that they were humans. They were just like you. They were just like me. And we can make that change. We can make that positive change in our lives because it really is a big deal. I want to end on a quote that I came across when preparing for this lesson. And it may have got cut off, but we'll be okay. It says, never make the mistake of thinking that we are disciples simply because we agree with what the Bible says or go to church. A disciple is a person who has stepped beyond mere agreement to definite action. He has committed himself to do. Now, yes, this was written by uninspired men. This was written out of some commentary that I had on my computer. But I mentioned this at the beginning of the lesson, and I wanted to end with it. Because notice it says that a disciple is a person who has stepped beyond mere agreement. What is he talking about? Well, he's talking about so many things that so many of us do, and I'm guilty of it myself before. We'll open up our Bibles, we'll read a passage, and say, well, I agree with what that says. But then we'll go off and we won't do anything about it. James talks about that and says it's like a man who looks at himself in a mirror and then goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. Well, that's what we do. We say, well, I agree with what Jesus said. And one of my primary examples on this point is evangelism. And, it's such a good point to think about. Some of you know that I was on the board, or still am on the board, of the East Coast Evangelism Conference. And I was asked to join last year, and we've talked about it, and it's very interesting because so many people, they'll read the passages that say, go evangelize. We'll read when Christ said, go and make disciples, teach them to do and observe all the things I've commanded you, which would include evangelizing. And, all these things, we say, well, I agree with what Jesus said there. But then how many of us are actively evangelizing? And then, we can do that to so many different commandments. We say, well, I agree with what he says here, but then we don't do it. We think that we don't have to do that. We're doing so many other things that if we don't do this, it's okay. Well, no, sin of omissions are just as sinful as sin of commissions. But too often we make this mistake of thinking we're disciples simply because we agree, and that's not the case. Zacchaeus wasn't a disciple until he made that decision to commit himself to do. He wasn't a follower of Christ just by saying, well, hey, Jesus, you have some pretty good points. I'm pretty sure Jesus would not have responded the way he did until Zacchaeus said, hey, I'm going to commit myself to do. I'm going to make that change and put it into definite action. So I encourage you, whether you're sitting here and you're not a Christian, you haven't put him on in baptism, you haven't made that step to dedicate your lives fully to Christ and say, hey, I'm going to live for you every single day. Don't wait. Commit yourself to do. Put it into definite action now. The time is now. Maybe you're sitting here, you are a Christian, and you're struggling with living your lives for Christ. You have those things like Zacchaeus had that made his life very comfortable, but that wasn't serving Christ. Whatever you need to do to come back to Jesus, to rededicate your lives to him, don't just say, I agree. Say more than that. Say, I agree and I'm going to make a change. Wherever you're able to do, whatever your need is, we're waiting here with open arms. Please come now as we stand and sing. Falleth tender leave upon the green.
Come and I will give you rest.